Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole. I am Michael Cole, and today I have on with me my friend Wes Wennerstrom. Say
Hi,
hi. Yeah.
how you doing?
So today we're going to be talking about. I was thinking mental health. You had said behavioral health. So why don't you start us off by explaining what behavioral health is, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So behavioral health is kind of an encompassing term for mental health, and then other services that are kind of adjacent or strongly related, such as substance use disorder, and then other services that um, are, I guess, related to a person's uh, socioeconomic factors, so case management and the like. So, for instance, if you had someone in like a jail setting and they were getting mental health services, they would also be getting services that are helping them transition to the community, helping their families navigate changes, and just navigate a lot of different systems. So, behavioral health has kind of become a more encompassing term, like I said.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I
Yep.
think I would have. I think the substance abuse help makes sense. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
thought of the prison population and trying to reintroduce them back into uh, non-prison society, but that is a really cool factor that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's forensic social work. So, yeah, that's another fancy term, forensic. But it's not like fingerprints or whatever. It just means justice involved. So, that's something I've done in the past.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, Wes is a professional in this field. You are actually the first professional I've had on the podcast. Everything else has
Oh,
just
really?
been people kind of talking about our thoughts on things, but actually having somebody who has a degree in this is it will be a little bit different of a feel, which is in a good way. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah. Well, I've been listening to your podcast, and I kind of enjoy that it's a conversation as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's my hope is even right now with you, I'm hoping that we'll it'll be more conversational, but you'll bring a little more weight, I guess, to it. And even though I am obviously not a behavioral health expert, I am a mental health expert in personal in my personal capacity because I've been dealing with uh, manic depression and bipolar disorder since I was 18.
Yeah.
Then obviously, when I say professional, or I don't mean like that. I mean, or expert. I mean like just that I have now had 20 years of dealing of knowing that I was dealing with it because I was actually dealing with it for about 4 or 5 years before I got diagnosed.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
that's a good point. I mean, you are the expert of your own, your own mental health and your own recovery. So yeah, that goes a long way in um, engaging with people and having recovery.
yeah.
Hmm.
Obviously, anywhere that you have professional insight, you should weigh in on it. But
Okay.
my original thought on bringing you on was to talk kind of obviously I've been dealing with mental health for a long time. I know that you had some similar mental health work to do on yourself
Hmm.
in high school. I don't know how far you know you were dealing with as far as seeing a therapist or medication or anything like that, but then you transitioned into being a professional. So if you want to give us any insight as to how you see that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the social work field and in the therapy field in general, there are a lot of folks that have dealt with their own either disorders or grief and loss or substance use issues. And they oftentimes will use it to inform their work. And through that process, they kind of tease out, what's me, what's the client, what do I want to get out of this? Am I trying to change the world? Am I trying to change myself? It's oftentimes both. Yeah, I've had my own mental health struggles. I've kind of come to understand them as being maybe genetically based.
Yeah.
Depression runs in my family. I've had on and off episodes of major depression in my lifetime. Um, and now I take a medication for it, and it's actually working out really well. And this is the longest time I've been on a medication consistently. Um, I've also dealt with some issues of just vicarious trauma from having worked in the social work field for the past 10 years, seeing things, experiencing things, working too hard, burning out, and that happens to a lot of folks in the field.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not that it's the same thing, but I know a bit about caretaker. Is it caretaker fatigue, or I forget the term for it? But I would imagine it's a similar process for somebody working with patients and clients dealing with mental health, that there's going to be some burnout. Um,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and there's also there's this kind of new term that's in vogue, and actually, I was just kind of going through a restaurant the other day to use the bathroom, and I saw it on a television, and they were talking about it, and it's oh crap, what is it called? Moral injury, and this is a kind of a term that's gained some traction during the pandemic because folks are have been asked not to conduct business as usual.
Hmm.
And a lot of professionals like EMTs, in the early days of the pandemic, they didn't know, should I be giving this person mouth to mouth? Or, they're like I was in a state hospital facility and people were, not able to provide the same level of care they were because of the strictures that were placed on them or concerns about their safety. So the term moral injury, it's basically, I can't do things it really, the way I feel like I need to, and the way I feel like I need to engage with somebody. Um, and it's not the same as burnout. It's just kind of like being mixed up inside,
Yeah,
and
no,
that's
that
stressful. Yeah.
absolutely makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, with you're introducing me to a whole bunch of new terms, and they all make, they're all pretty interesting. That moral injury one, I can think of about a dozen examples of ways that could play out, and that kind of uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like the discourse is catching up around the pandemic. A lot of people just didn't know how to interpret what was going on with them
yeah.
in the early stages, at least. Yeah.
um so one thing that I will say that I've done in the last 2 or 3 years, I guess it was since the pandemic, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, that has helped me enormously, and you kind of kicked it off for me, was I stopped using Facebook. Um, I mean, my Facebook profile still exists, and I
Mhm.
and I have the messenger on my phone in case people want to get in touch with me,
Yeah.
and my Instagram does feed to my Facebook, but like, and I stopped using it. What was that name of that documentary that you had recommended to me? Um,
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It was on Netflix. It was like the social
the
something,
Social Dilemma.
social dilemma. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
After
totally.
that, after that, and then going into the 2020 election cycle, I I like literally had burnout from, like, I had a mental burnout to an extent where I was just like, I was mixed between like rage and uh being distraught on a really regular cycle. And so I think I had just, you had told me about that, and you would, I think, shut off most of your social media for a little bit, and then I saw that movie, and I quit Facebook, and I'm still on Instagram, but like, Instagram to me is such a less toxic place the way I use it than Facebook was.
Yeah.
Facebook was just uh, constant discussion of politics with people who just want to like fight, And whereas Instagram for me is um, typically it's like funny stuff or food or travel, and that's like all it is. Like I
Yeah,
joke, I joke with Sarah all the time that if anybody ever saw our Instagram DMs to each other, that they would just think we were like bizarre because it's all, oh, here's a recipe I like and a place I want to go, and it's all of that, and sometimes without words, and so it's a much more healthier place for me than Facebook was.
yeah. Well, I think that with Instagram, I mean, it's more like content based. It's less like, oh, I'm going to state this opinion and then we're going to have it out in the comments. I feel like that was really the focal point of Facebook.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, like, yeah, all the social media stuff. I mean, it's difficult because we're really, uh, it's like we're losing connection to one another, and like connection is such an important piece of mental health. And I've just like not even intending to had so many relationships go sour just based on like a Facebook comment or something like that.
yeah,
And it's like I look back on it, it's like, man, you know, it's like that's what I felt. And like if I was talking with someone in person, I still would have held my ground, but like it, you know, it would just be different,
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's just bizarre. It's
Yeah.
weird to think
Well,
about.
there's a few things I think, and you'll say, maybe not you, and I don't think I'd do this, but typically a lot of people will say stuff that they wouldn't say in person
Yeah,
and it gets way more vitriolic. But then on the other hand, you also, even in the, like, say you had a conversation where you might word for word say that in real life the way you said it on Facebook, you're not hearing the tone or seeing the facial expressions that go with it, and
right.
that can just create more empathy, even if the person is saying something shitty to you, or you're saying something shitty to the person. There, the look of pain, like on somebody's face, or the look of frustration on somebody's face, you're going to feel some level of empathy.
Hmm.
Most people will. I know, I don't know how like really trolly kind of people would, but and most people that I connect with in life, I feel like wouldn't behave the way on in real life that they do on Facebook.
Oh, absolutely not. No way. And yeah, to your point about like that kind of affective communication, that's really important.
Yeah.
You know, I saw this really funny meme that was like it's like, oh, these people that they can't stand small talk, they want to never have small talk, and it's like, you're not going to walk through your door into your house and be like, hi honey, I'm home. Have you thought about the eternal abyss that like resides all around us? It's like people don't talk to each other that way.
Yeah.
They go and they look at each other, and they mirror each other, and there's the mirror neurons and all that. you know
Yeah, that's true too. That's something I had not thought about, is the balance in which we have conversations with people in real
yeah.
life.
Hmm.
Because yeah, you come home and you say, "Oh, my day sucked," and
Yeah.
"Oh, I can't believe it's gray out another day." And then you get, you spend a couple hours and you talk about real stuff and you talk about fake stuff, and it's all kind of balanced out a bit. But if you're only talking about fake stuff, or you're only talking about really hardcore shit, then it creates a
Yeah.
really, it's like eating all meat or eating all, I don't know, not all vegetables, because I think that all vegetables wouldn't do that, but you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to have, what is it, variety is the spice of life.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And man, I feel for kids nowadays. They just like for this to be their reality.
Yeah,
It's no wonder they're just losing hope, and all. There's like this rise in pediatric depression.
yeah,
You know, it's just horrible. Like I'm really happy I was raised when I was raised. Because I got to just wonder about things. Like
yeah,
have an imagination. And it's not like that anymore.
yeah. I've been trying really hard with Logan. I mean, every kid has screen time and he has probably too much screen time, but we have a good amount of time where he will say to me stuff like, "I'm bored," and he hates my response to "I'm bored" because I always say "good," and he's like, Why is that good? And I'm like, because if you're bored, you're going to learn how to entertain yourself. You're going to learn how to be, eventually, you're going to learn how to be good with your thoughts in the quiet.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't want that all the time, but you want it sometimes. And he doesn't get it yet. And I mean, he's 6, so it's not like it's new to him. But we went for a walk like a week and a half ago. We went for a walk, and we got like one house away from our house, and he's like, "Okay, I'm ready to go home," and I'm like, "We're not doing that." And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Look, we're gonna go for a walk, and we're gonna go for a while, and I want you to learn how to be good with stuff. You need to learn how to do stuff that's not the thing you want to be doing, like." And I said, if that means while we're walking, you want to stop and collect rocks, or you want to stop and, I think he was collecting acorns that day. I said, I'm fine with that. If you want to stop when we get to a swing set, you can swing for a few minutes. But what we're not doing is the second we're like tired of something, we're not just getting rid of it and going away from it. I'm like, you really need to learn how to be good in the, to deal with things not being what you want all the time, because and I'm trying, it's my way of trying to counteract the constant instant gratification that the internet fakely gives us.
Yeah. Well, for especially for really severe mental health disorders, and this is kind of the same for everybody on some level, is that you just have to have a way to kind of work through almost like a cycle of things, so it's like, you have to understand, like, are you hungry? Did you get enough sleep? um, you know uh, are you able to identify the emotions you feel? Are there several emotions in place at once?
Yeah.
um, but I mean, and like, this is great for people with a variety of disorders. The one that really comes to mind is called borderline personality disorder. Are you aware of that disorder?
I've heard of it. I know it's what Pete Davidson has,
Yeah, yeah. Pete Davidson's a really good example.
but I
Uh,
I don't fully understand it.
yeah. So essentially, it's a really frantic fear of abandonment, and it kind of um, it's due to trauma, and it causes a variety of behaviors, and some of them are doing things that are really extreme, or threatening suicide, that sort of thing. Um, but there's a treatment for it called dialectical behavior therapy, um, and it's essentially mindfulness. Um, and are you familiar with mindfulness?
I think so. That's Yeah. I mean, I don't think I could describe it, but I think I know what it is.
Okay, it's like, what do I taste? What do I see? What are the sensations on my body? That sort of thing. So it's just slowing down a cycle of escalation. Um, but you could say the same thing for life. Just being aware of your surroundings, being connected to them. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like lost so much in my phone that I forget where I am, who I am, what I'm doing. And it's a weird feeling. Um, I think I just feel like kids are losing those basic skills,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, causing worse behavior in children, or if they're just, if it's just a mental health issue where they feel depressed, or if it's, coming off and that they're harder to deal with. I don't know. I don't work with kids as of right now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that we can learn a lot from, the deep reaches of behavioral health and psychology.
Yeah. Yeah, I with Logan, I haven't noticed. I do worry about long-term effects as much as I worry about short-term. Like,
Yeah.
ultimately, I try to think about it, and it's like every kid probably acts a little bit like an asshole, like
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
regularly. So, like, ultimately, you just want to get the kid to the right spot in the end.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, there's a degree to which it's unacceptable, and but like, I'm also trying not to stifle him just being a kid. But yeah, ultimately, like, partly, I mean, even before I knew all of this, knew what I know about social media and all this stuff it's doing to our brains. Um, as somebody who has a history of severe depression, and if I'm even though it hasn't been diagnosed on multiple levels, it seems very clear to me that it's a family trait. I
Hmm.
even before we had Logan, I was nervous about having a kid that potentially would be inheriting all of this. And then you add on top of that the fact that they do have more stimulus than we had. Um, and obviously we had more than our parents had,
Yeah, yeah. I was just
but
thinking about that.
our generation is in a bit of a interesting space. Like I tell people at work, like some of the younger people I work with, like, oh, I didn't have text messaging till I was an adult on my own phone plan. Like,
Yeah,
they don't understand that.
yeah. And then we had the T9,
Yeah,
just not the same thing, you know.
yeah, and even that I didn't have that till I think I was 20.
Yeah,
Like, and so like we are good enough at at adapting to technology compared to previous generations without allowing the technology to completely rule us the way the following. I don't know how much Gen Z but like, or as I say, the younger millennials, but Gen Z, I think they're what do they call it? Digital natives? Is that what the term is? And,
I've heard that. What's
uh,
that?
I think digital natives is like basically all of the technology was ubiquitous when they became, you know, relatively conscious,
Uh, okay,
not
so it's
adults, but like adolescents or whatever.
gotcha, gotcha. Well, yeah, it's well. I mean, remember how much MTV like we watched as kids? I just like I remember
I
just
wasn't
sitting
allowed to
there.
watch MTV till I
You
was
weren't
like
allowed to.
17.
Yeah, I mean, I guess everyone had some degree of this, but yeah, I just remember just like sitting there, just rotting my brain on MTV. You know,
Yeah.
and it was just like, it was kind of similar to Instagram. Instagram. I mean, it's like watching television, really.
Yeah.
Uh, and then when you go to watch actual television, it seems so primitive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
And I feel like I still read regularly, but I don't think I read nearly as much as I used to. And part of that is like life. For me, life is fairly exhausting. Like going,
yeah,
waking up early to go run, which I've been doing a lot more working out all summer long, trying to get in better physical shape, but also because I know that it offsets a lot of my depression symptoms.
yeah.
And, so I'm doing that in the mornings. Then I'm going to work. Then I'm coming home and I've got two dogs and a 6 year old and my wife, and they're all talking or barking or yelling at me when I walk in the door. And it goes until almost bedtime. And then I will like sneak away and read like 5 pages of a book. And my
Yeah,
eyes are so heavy,
sure.
and then I'm like passing out. And then they're like, "It's only 9:30. Why are you passing out?" And I'm like, "It's so exhausting." But and that is a good day. That's like a really like I feel good at the end of those days, even though I'm exhausted, because
Yeah.
it's a lot of times it is those days when you come home and you watch a couple hours of TV and zone out, and then you're like, "Ugh, I feel gross."
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, those early childhood years are, yeah, they're exhausting, and good on you, bud.
Yeah. Well, honestly, he is maybe the least tiring. Well, actually, I take that back because he has so much energy. But he goes. I mean, he won't wake up in the morning. That's a constant fight. But he could go till midnight every night of the week at like full pace, and then
No, no.
he just like slides into bed and passes out. Well, I mean, it's a fight to get him to bed, but once he gets to bed, he's out in a minute and a half, 2 minutes. But it
Oh,
is
yeah,
it,
bedtime,
it
man.
is all of his energy almost from the moment he wakes up till almost the moment he goes to sleep.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing to think about that.
Yeah. It's like a vampire though, because I'm pretty sure he drains all of our energy to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Soon
Yeah.
they'll be a teenager and they'll want nothing to do with you. So,
Yeah, I'm aware. I'm really scared of that. That's
yeah,
going to be my when I was growing up, my dad my dad took things more personal, I think, than he should have.
Sure.
And when I was going through the teenage, like, railing against what he wanted stages, and into my 20s when we weren't getting along, it was it was very clear to me how personal he was taking it. And I'm looking back, I've been looking back at it for a few years now and been like, I'm not sure I'm not going to be able to handle it any better. I feel like there's a good chance Logan's going to be like, fuck you, Dad, and I'm just going to go off and cry.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like you have your own feelings too,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like it's amazing how much of the stuff when you think about it is just so normal. You know, it's
Yeah.
like kids 2 to 4 like just being terrors and teenagers being sullen and staying up until 2 in the morning. You know, a lot of this stuff is just the more people learn, the better we do. The more education we have on these psychiatric things and just normal development, and that's really getting to be out there a lot more. It's one of the better or the finer points about social media is like you get that information daily. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but a lot of it is just you would think it's this big issue and it's just kind of normal. In perspective.
True. Yeah. I think I'll be, if let's say he grows up and does end up having some mental health issues similar to mine, I think I'll be able to help him. But
Yeah,
I'm also hoping in the raising, in the stage of raising him, I'm hoping to avoid, because I'm not entirely sure how much of mine is chemical and hereditary and how much of it is trauma based.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I think you and I were both bullied around the same time by probably the same kids. The bullying was very severe from 7th to 8th grade,
yeah.
and I feel like I've told you this before, but I was sexually assaulted by another kid, um, when we were in 8th grade, um,
Yeah, yeah,
and I the more I grow and the more I have, my perspective changes, and now, that was a third of my life ago, and the more I look at it, things like that, the more I realize that a lot of this might not be, a bunch of chemical imbalance. I mean, it could also be, or it could be a combination of the two things. But
yeah.
I
And
think
that's
that,
usually how it goes. Yeah,
yeah, I think, and so I'm hoping that in keeping him away from, um, hopefully keeping him away from bullies to some extent, being open. I mean, my parents, I think, would have been more open to help me if I had trusted them.
yeah,
Um, because I know that, like, when my dad found out what was going on with me, he ended it immediately, and he handled it like the exact perfect way. But it was going on for almost 2 years at that point, and so, like, and it was because I was afraid to tell him, and so, and it wasn't his fault that I was afraid to tell him. It was just like, you don't know how to deal with it. But I'm trying to learn
hmm
how to make Logan comfortable so that he knows he can tell me anything. Because I
yeah,
think that if I had done that and avoided that, I at least think that some of my trauma would be gone, and or a lot of my trauma would be gone, and therefore my mental health would be better.
yeah. Well, trauma does not help with mental health. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and I mean, you raise a good point too, in that those things are used to happen in schools. I mean, they still happen in schools, of course, but now we have language around it. And we, there's more support for mental health issues and more support for kids that get bullied in school nowadays. You know,
Yeah.
and I've done school social work, and I've worked with kids who bullied, and they have their own stuff going on, and it's actually really horrible stuff when you really get into it. You
Oh
know,
yeah. I
but
would be willing to bet that the person who
yeah,
sexually assaulted me was probably being sexually assaulted.
right,
Like,
right,
based on my understanding of things now and the profile. I mean, this was a kid who was smaller than me and younger than me. I mean, when I say younger, same class, but
Yeah.
6 months younger. So it wasn't like some older kid or an
Right.
adult. And so, like for me, that just there has to be something more. Like some kid isn't doing that in a typical like in what we think of as like a typical bullying manner. That
Mhm.
was something deeper in one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, first of all.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, I just think that really we've just come a long way in understanding what we need to address in kids. And, a lot of people will attribute this to high needs settings, schools that are under resourced. But I mean, eh, any school could benefit from having a counselor on staff.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, one of the things about, a low resource Catholic school like we went to is they just didn't have that available.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Well, eh,
we've talked plenty about the schools that we went to when we were younger. You know, but
yeah, but I'm not entirely
it's,
sure if they had the resources. I mean, would it have served? Would they have used it that way anyway if they had the resources? Because and I don't want to go. We don't have to go too far into my problems with religion, but with private schools, I think there's a lot of it is the desire to seclude kids from society to some extent. And
yeah.
while I don't think that most people are sending their kids to school to be abused or to be bullied to a private school. Uh, the abusers and the bullies have some of the same similar needs as what the parents want their kids being shielded from
Hmm.
to some extent. Maybe I'm not articulating that correctly, but
Well,
like,
yeah.
but oh, I don't want them to learn about this, but like, I know that a big risk from what I've been hearing with people wanting more homeschooling and stuff and not wanting these well checks on homeschooled kids is like it's a good way of hiding abuse. And
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately, it's also, you can't assume that everyone who's doing that is trying to hide abuse. There's some people who genuinely are afraid to send their kids because they don't believe in the thing that's being taught in the school, whether, on a whole bunch of different things. But then there's also the people who are like, yeah, well, if they go to school, that they're going to see the bruises or the whatever signs of abuse that's going on. And so when you have that mentality, but you're sending them to a private school instead of say homeschool, you're allowing bullies and other kids to and potentially adults to take advantage of that same isolation.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of like a perennial issue that's, it's like, okay, parents have the right to raise their kids that they want to, or the ways that they want to. But when you start to look at, the harm that they're doing, it can either be subjective or quite objective. It's like, this kid has no social skills. This kid, needs extra help. Say they have a kid with a disability or something like that, and they're not getting it. Uh, yeah, I mean, it can be strange, and you bring into things or bring like child protective services or whatnot into the fold, and you know, you can get some interesting culture clash, and that factors into assessments of a person's mental health too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
hmm Yeah, there's a really good book called "The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down." Um, I can recommend either to you or your listeners, and it's about um, a it's about a town in California. I think it's called Merced, um, where these Hmong people have been living, and Hmong are like an ethnic group from Cambodia that the U.S. brought in as refugees after Vietnam,
Okay.
and they have really different ideas about epilepsy. They think epilepsy is a gift, and they have this child with really severe epilepsy, and they are just really not engaging with the U.S. medical system, and the kid is just getting worse and worse. So it's about kind of the balance between cultures and what's expected in modern day medicine and capitalism.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm curious to talk to you about. I don't know that you've had this issue. I guess the best way for me to describe it is that like I have really negatives historically. I have really negative self talk, and I almost think of it as like Gollum and Smeagol. Um, and for this summer, one of the things that I've been doing is so I've had this voice that I've in my head where I've told myself how much I suck or how stupid or anytime I'm feeling guilty about something.
Yeah.
Um, for years, for as long as I can remember, this voice has been in my head, and it's not a detached voice. It sounds like it's just hard for me to describe it any other way. But it's not detached. It is me thinking these thoughts, obviously, and I'm aware and I can control it to some extent. And so this summer, at some point, I just was like, if I'm working this hard in every other way, I gotta try to stop and not indulge myself in this negative self talk. And it sounds weird to say indulge, but
Hmm.
like when going to sleep for months, for maybe years, when going to sleep, I would tell myself how shitty I was. And so when I stopped allowing myself to do it, I didn't sleep well for like a month while my system had to like I had to relearn. So that's kind of what you were just saying about the almost like the mental muscle memory of it, and it was exhausting, like
Hmm.
trying to be like, okay, don't you cannot blame yourself, you cannot tell yourself you're shitty right now. And
Yeah.
it was so tiring, and it's still to I mean it's only been a couple months and I've been doing it for years and years. So like earlier tonight, like I didn't really allow it myself, but it wipes me out energy wise, and it's just retraining your brain. And I had when I first was becoming an atheist, I had to do it so that I wasn't immediately trying to pray when I had an issue, like because I was still doing that, because you get into these mental muscle memory
Oh,
states,
interesting.
and
Hmm.
retraining myself on those things has been so difficult, and it's very tiring.
Hmm.
Have you ever had anything like that, or
Well,
dealt with anybody with describing what I'm describing?
yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, have dealt with this. I'm trying to think of maybe something that I could relate to there. I mean, I understand what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, your thoughts kind of make your reality, as they say with like cognitive behavior therapy. Um, and yeah, it's just, therapy is also a process of learning. It's important to learn. When I'm working with kids, I'll bring out like the faces for them to interpret, like, what's this face? Can you have two emotions at the same time? That sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and I get what you're saying, and it's hard to break negative patterns like that. It's really hard to find self-esteem when you haven't had it for a long time,
yeah,
you know. And people that are survivors, it's really difficult to locate. It can be a really long process. Um, and then yeah, sleep is a weird thing. I until I went on antidepressant maybe like 8 months ago, I was just having the worst couple of years of sleep of my life, and it really is a disaster for mental health as well.
yeah.
Um,
It's all
but yeah,
it.
I mean, like, yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
I
I was
could
just
see
gonna say
how.
it's also really important to get sleep. So like, my
Yeah,
dad has Alzheimer's,
yeah,
and I the doctor thinks, and this makes 100% sense, he was an insomniac basically for 20 years, where he would get less than
yeah.
3 hours of sleep,
Ooh,
and it
Jesus.
just racked his brain. And like, I mean, you could talk to my dad. He's still early stages, and
Yeah,
he's relatively young, but like and a big thing that they did when they diagnosed him was they got him on sleep medication and made sure that his sleep and that slowed the progression down. But
yeah,
I since I've learned all that, I've told everybody, like, even if it feels like, oh, like I can go a couple nights without sleep, that's you can you're it will mess up a week or two of your life to do that. But if you're going too long term, and I don't know where that line is, you just said 2 years, that scares me a little bit, the idea of having 2 years of bad sleep. So that's
uh,
something I've been advocating for since I've learned that about my father.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that's like kind of the behavioral health that I'm
Hmm.
talking about, so like, things like if you can't get good sleep, like you're going to be in a terrible mood, you're going to have, what looks like an affect disorder, right? Like depression or even like mania or something like that.
Hmm.
So, it's how you interact with like what you need to do every day, and yeah. So not taking your medications, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, it's important to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, Unless you've got anything else, I think maybe we should wrap up. I've got one final not related question, but do you have anything else that you want to throw in first?
You know, um, I've recently started working in policy. Depending on where you live, it might be just look at your state's resources for behavioral health. Just Google your state and behavioral health. It's interesting what you might find and see what's out there.
Great, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Um, I, I feel like, and I could be wrong on this, isn't September Suicide Awareness Month or is Suicide Awareness Day is coming up? I've been seeing a bunch of stuff for it recently. Oh yeah,
Uh,
September
I,
30th is
oh, okay, great.
it's actually no, it's sorry, it's the whole month is Suicide Awareness Month. And obviously we're not just talking about suicide today, but obviously that's a huge issue in this country and in mental health, mental and behavioral health. And it's something that it wasn't on purpose that I brought you on in September. It just coincided that way, but
Yeah. Well, so 988, are you familiar with that?
that's the new direct dial for the hotline instead of having to do an 800 number or something, right?
Yeah, and it's a mental health crisis line.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of calling police, you can call this line, but it's based on the network of suicide crisis hotlines. So it can be really either.
Great, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, it just went national. It's a great program, so check it out.
Yeah. Um. Okay, so the you've listened to a couple episodes, right?
Yeah,
So my final question shouldn't come as too big of a surprise to you. Hopefully,
yeah.
what is the thing that you enjoy or that you have found the most humor in making fun of yourself?
Oh, definitely that I maybe look and sound like Nicolas Cage.
I've never. I can see it and I can kind of hear it, but I had never thought of that before.
Yeah, well, it used to be, well, people would say like, "Oh, you look like Nicolas Cage," and I'd be like, "Oh," and they'd be like, "Oh, like the young, sexy Nicolas Cage,"
Oh
and
yeah.
I'd be like, "Okay," and then my friend was like, "It's not that you look like him; it's that you sound like him," and I was like, "Oh," So it took me a while. He's
Yeah.
just such like a self-serious actor, and I don't want to think of myself like a completely self-serious person. You
he
know?
he both is and isn't at the same time though,
Yeah.
because he is like you. Have you ever seen there was that movie that came out earlier this year with him that was the unbearable lightness of incredible talent or something.
Yeah, yeah. I watched it on the plane actually, going somewhere. And yeah, I mean like I think he's a good actor, to be honest,
Yeah, he is. He just picks. Sometimes he picks really shitty stuff, but he's a good actor, and he
Yeah.
chews the scenery a lot. But that is a good that's a good joke. I have not thought about that for you. And it's
Just
a
once in a while, like I remember I was in like a training and this woman just turns to me and goes, "Has anyone ever told you you resemble Nicolas Cage?" And it's just like, oh God, it's like a dagger, but I
yeah.
don't know. It's made me appreciate Nicolas Cage a little more, I think.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm always a little glad when I ask people that question and their first response isn't, "Oh, remember when you used to make fun of me for?" Because the first couple or for several episodes, I think it was about me making fun of people, and I'm like, out of context, this might sound terrible, but
I can't remember anything specifically. I don't know.
yeah,
I'm thinking of another thing, but it wasn't me related and it's not appropriate, so I'll tell you later.
yeah. Is it anything about waffles?
No, not
Oh,
waffles. But thanks for incorporating that into the wedding speech.
oh,
And good wedding speech, by the way.
thank you.
I want to give you a little golf clap on that one. That was I love the motorcycle story and the braces story. That was pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a really good time giving that speech. Although I will say my favorite part speeches wise of your wedding was when your sister-in-law was talking about you being invited into the group text for the family and just being like, I think the vaccine. What did you say? I found this article about why we shouldn't take the vaccine.
Yeah, Bonnie was like, "Oh, don't do it. They're not going to open it." And I was like, "No, I'm doing it." So I sent them this thing that was like the real truth that Fauci doesn't want you to know, and it was a Rickroll, and
Yeah.
like no one would open it. And finally, Bonnie was like, "Guys, I think Wes has some really good points here, and I think you should open it." And nobody wanted to, but they did. And then everyone was like, "Yeah, this guy's in. This is great." Yeah,
Yeah, that was great.
it was fun.
All right, well, I think we'll bring this episode to a close. Other than your local state resources and 988, is there anything else that you wanted to promote or mention or?
If you want to follow my guitar Instagram, you can. I make guitars for fun. It's Olympia Guitar Company. So
Great,
that's
yeah,
something fun to do.
and they are
Yeah.
beautiful guitars.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right, cool. Well, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Thanks for coming. This was great.
Yeah, man. Well, I hope you have a better rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, bye, man.